David Roberts had 6 months to live when he convinced his family to take one final sailing trip together. The oncologist's words still echoed in his mind as he signed the charter agreement for the Serenity. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe 8, if you're lucky. David hadn't felt lucky in years, but he'd felt determined. One last perfect memory for his family before the treatments began, before the inevitable conversations, before everything changed forever. He should have inspected the boat more carefully, should have questioned why the charter company offered such a steep discount on a recently refurbished vessel, should have listened to the harbour master's casual comment about the boat's previous owner having some mechanical issues. But David Roberts was a man running out of time, and time makes you take shortcuts you'd never consider otherwise. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes after they cleared the marina. "Dad, there's water in the forward cabin," Marcus called from below deck, his voice carrying that particular teenage irritation reserved for pointing out adult failures. "Just check the through hulls," David called back, not taking his eyes off the horizon. The last thing he wanted was another argument with his 17-year-old son. Not today. Not on what might be their final trip together, but Marcus appeared in the companionway holding up a soggy sailing magazine. "Dad, this is seepage. The hull's compromised." "You're being dramatic," Sarah said from where she sat, reading, not looking up from her book. "Your father knows what he's doing." The words stung more than they should have. David Roberts had been sailing for 20 years, but lately it seemed like everything he touched turned to conflict. His marriage was hanging by a thread of polite conversations and separate bedrooms. His children treated him like an inconvenience to be managed rather than a father to be respected. And now he was dying, and none of them knew, and the boat he'd chosen for their final family, memory was literally falling apart beneath them. "Maybe we should head back," 15-year-old Emma suggested quietly. She was the family peacemaker, always trying to smooth over the tensions that seemed to follow them everywhere lately. "We just got out here," David snapped, louder than he'd intended. The words carried the weight of desperation he couldn't explain, not without revealing the diagnosis burning in his chest like a secret fire. "Can't we have one family trip without everyone complaining?" Sarah finally looked up from her book, her nurse's instincts catching something in his tone. "David, what's wrong? You've been on edge for weeks." "Nothing's wrong. I just want us to have a nice time together. Is that too much to ask?" 12-year-old Jamie, always sensitive to adult tensions, hugged his knees to his chest. "Are you guys going to fight the whole time?" "We're not fighting," David and Sarah said simultaneously, which only made the lie more obvious. Marcus emerged fully from below deck, water dripping from his shoes. "The bilge pump can't keep up. We're taking on water faster than it can handle." David felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the boat's mechanical problems. He'd planned this trip as a gift to his family. Final perfect days before the cancer treatments began, before he had to tell them he was dying, before everything became about hospitals and prognoses and countdown calendars. But the boat was failing, his family was bickering, and his secret felt like it was suffocating him from the inside. "Fine," he said, reaching for the ignition. "We'll head back." The engine turned over once, twice, then died, with a mechanical wheeze that sounded almost human. "David!" Sarah's voice was sharp now, her book forgotten. He tried the engine again, nothing but a clicking sound that seemed to echo their family's dysfunction, broken parts trying desperately to connect, but missing each other entirely. The last thing David Roberts remembered saying to his son was, "You never listen." Now, 6 hours into what should have been their family's healing voyage, those words echoed in his skull as he watched 17-year-old Marcus jury-rig a water collection system from torn sailcloth and medical tubing. The kid's hands moved with surprising precision, fingers that usually flew across video game controllers now threading rope through makeshift grommets. "Dad, I need you to hold this steady." Marcus didn't look up from his work, but his voice carried an authority David had never heard before. David wanted to say something, an apology, maybe, or acknowledgement, that his son had just possibly saved their lives. Instead, he gripped the aluminum frame and watched Marcus work, salt spray stinging the guilt in his eyes. The Serenity groaned beneath them, her hull taking on water faster than their jury-rigged bilge pump could expel it. What had started as a perfect sailing day off the California coast had become a nightmare of miscalculation and mechanical failure. The GPS had died first, then the radio, then the engine when they'd needed it most. Now they drifted in waters David couldn't identify, with storm clouds building on the horizon, and his family looking to him for answers he didn't have. "How much water do we have left?" Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, the same tone she used when asking about overdue mortgage payments or parent-teacher conferences they'd both forgotten to attend. David didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the salt air like an accusation. 3 gallons, maybe 4 if they were careful. With 4 people in 90-degree heat, that meant. "Enough for now," he said, which wasn't a lie but felt like one. Their daughter, Emma, 15 and fierce, looked up from where she sat beside her younger brother Jamie. She'd been quiet since the crisis began. Too quiet for a girl who normally filled every silence with observations about social media or complaints about family trips. Her eyes found David's and held them. "We're not going to die out here, are we, Dad?" The question was simple. The answer should have been simpler. "Of course not, sweetheart. Daddy will fix this. The Coast Guard is looking for us." But David Roberts had built his 45 years on careful honesty, and even now, with his family depending on him for comfort as much as leadership, he couldn't quite bring himself to lie. "We're going to be smart, and we're going to work together, and we're going to get through this," he said instead. Emma studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." But David caught the look she exchanged with Marcus, a quick, silent communication that excluded their parents entirely. When had his children started having conversations he wasn't part of? The wind picked up, and the Serenity's damaged mainsail fluttered uselessly. Marcus had managed to get them running under a jury-rigged jib, but their speed was barely 2 knots and their direction was anyone's guess. The compass spun lazily in its housing, magnetic field disrupted by something they couldn't identify. "I should have listened to you about the weather radio," Sarah said quietly. David turned to look at his wife. 3 days ago, she'd suggested buying a backup emergency radio for the boat. He'd dismissed it as unnecessary, another item for their already overcrowded budget. Sarah worked as a nurse at Peninsula General, 12-hour shifts that left her exhausted, but still somehow aware of every detail their household needed. She noticed when they were low on milk, when Jamie needed new shoes, when the boat's safety equipment hadn't been updated in 5 years. She noticed everything except how much David had been drinking lately. "The radio wouldn't have prevented the hull breach," he said. "No, but it might have gotten us help before." "Before what?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended. "Before I ran us into God knows what out there, before I got us lost. Is that what you were going to say?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I was going to say before we started blaming each other for things we can't change." Another gust of wind, stronger this time. The patched sails strained against Marcus's rigging, and David could hear water sloshing in the bilge, despite the pump's constant whirring. They were losing the race against the sea, degree by degree. "Dad," Jamie's voice was small. At 12, he was the family's emotional barometer, sensitive to every shift in adult mood. "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" The question hit like a rogue wave. David felt Sarah stiffen beside him, saw Emma's head snap up from her book, watched Marcus's hands pause in their work. "Why would you ask something like that, buddy?" "Because you've been sleeping in the guest room for 3 weeks and Mom cries when she thinks we can't hear her, and you both talk to us but not to each other." Jamie's voice was matter-of-fact, the way kids delivered devastating observations. And Tommy Hendricks said his parents did the same thing before they got divorced. David opened his mouth to deliver reassurances, but what came out instead was, "Your mother and I are having some problems." He felt Sarah's sharp intake of breath, saw Emma close her book with unnecessary force. This wasn't how he'd planned to have this conversation. Not here, not now, not with their lives literally hanging in the balance. "What kind of problems?" Emma demanded. "Adult problems," Sarah said quickly. "Things that don't concern—" "Everything about our family concerns us." Marcus had stopped working entirely now, his attention focused on his parents with laser intensity. "We live in the same house. We hear the fights. We see Dad's empty beer bottles in the recycling bin every week." The words hung in the air like a challenge. David felt exposed, caught in a lie he'd never quite told, but had lived every day for months. The drinking had started small, a beer with dinner, wine with Sarah, on weekends. But stress from work, from money, from the growing distance in his marriage had turned it into something else, something that made him sleep in guest rooms and avoid conversations about vacation budgets and emergency radios. "I don't want to talk about this right now," he said.
"When then?" Emma's voice rose. "When we get home? When we're not trapped on a sinking boat in the middle of nowhere?"
"We're not sinking," David said automatically. Marcus laughed, a sound without humour. "Dad, we're taking on water faster than we can pump it out. The hull breach is getting worse, our sails are shredded, and we don't even know which direction land is. In what possible sense are we not sinking?" The honesty was brutal and undeniable. David looked around at his family, really looked at them, maybe for the first time in months. Sarah's face was pale but determined, her nurse's training keeping her focused on solutions rather than problems. Emma had inherited her mother's pragmatism, but her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her both invaluable and impossible in a crisis. Jamie was scared but trying to hide it, the way he always did when adults raised their voices. And Marcus. Marcus was no longer the sullen teenager who'd complained about leaving his friends for a family sailing trip. Somewhere between the emergency and now, he'd become someone David didn't quite recognize, competent, focused, unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths. "You're right," David said finally. "We are sinking. And yes, your mother and I have been having problems. And yes, I've been drinking too much and sleeping in the guest room and avoiding conversations I should have had months ago." He looked at each of them in turn. "But right now, the only thing that matters is keeping us alive long enough to have those conversations on dry land. Can we agree on that?" Sarah reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were cold despite the heat, but her grip was firm. "What do you need us to do?" The storm hit 2 hours later. David had seen weather come up fast on the Pacific, but nothing like this. One moment they were sailing under clearing skies, the next they were fighting 60-knot winds and 12-foot swells that turned the Serenity into a cork bobbing in a washing machine. "Get below," he shouted to Sarah and the kids, but his words were torn away by the wind. Marcus was already moving, securing everything loose on deck with the efficiency of someone who'd actually paid attention during their sailing lessons. Emma helped Jamie into his life jacket while Sarah checked the emergency supplies they'd moved to the cockpit. A wave crashed over the bow, sending green water cascading into the cockpit. The boat lurched, and David heard something give way below, a sound like breaking bones. "That's the bulkhead," Marcus shouted over the wind. "The water's coming up through the cabin floor." They had minutes, maybe less, before the Serenity went down entirely. David's mind raced through their options. The life raft was designed for 4 people maximum, and he wasn't even sure it would inflate properly after years of storage. Their emergency beacon was somewhere below deck, potentially unreachable if the cabin was flooding. "The life raft," he called to Marcus. "Can you get to it?"
Marcus was already moving toward the stern locker, but another wave sent him sprawling across the deck. David started after him, but Sarah grabbed his arm.
"The beacon!" she shouted. "Someone needs to activate the emergency beacon." She was right. Without the beacon, they could survive the sinking only to die slowly of exposure and thirst. But the beacon was below deck, in a cabin that was rapidly filling with water. David looked at his family, at Sarah gripping Jamie's hand, at Emma helping Marcus to his feet, at all of them looking to him for a decision that would determine whether they lived or died. There wasn't time for both. He could try to reach the beacon, or he could help with the life raft, but not both. And if he chose wrong... "Emma!" he called. "You're the strongest swimmer. Can you get to the emergency beacon?" She looked toward the companionway, where water was now visibly sloshing up from below, then back at her father. What if I can't get back up? It was the question none of them wanted to ask. The companionway was narrow, and if the boat went down while she was below deck... "Then don't try," David said. "Your life is worth more than any beacon." Emma nodded, took a deep breath, and disappeared down the companionway. David turned to Marcus. "How long for the life raft?" 2 minutes, if the mechanism works. 5 if I have to cut it free." Another wave, bigger than the last. The Serenity groaned and listed further to starboard. Whatever was broken below deck was getting worse. "Sarah, gather the emergency supplies, food, water, anything that floats." She nodded and started stuffing items into a waterproof bag. Her movements were quick and efficient, years of emergency room training serving her well. Jamie stood frozen in the center of the cockpit, eyes wide with terror. "Hey, buddy." David knelt beside him, speaking as calmly as he could manage with the wind howling around them. "Remember what we practiced about staying calm in emergencies?" Jamie nodded. "This is just like that. We're going to take care of each other, and we're going to be smart, and we're going to get through this together. Okay?" "Okay, Dad." "Good. Now I need you to help Mom with the supplies. Can you do that?" Jamie nodded again and moved towards Sarah, his small hands surprisingly steady as he helped secure their meager survival gear. A splash from the stern. Marcus had gotten the life raft deployed. It bobbed alongside the Serenity like a bright orange island, waiting for them to abandon their boat and trust their lives to 20 pounds of rubber and hope. "Emma!" David called toward the companionway. No answer. He started toward the stairs, but Marcus grabbed his arm. "Dad, the boat's going down. If she's not up in 30 seconds, she's not coming up." David looked at his son, this boy who'd become a man somewhere between breakfast and catastrophe, and saw his own desperation reflected there. Marcus was right. They all knew it, but knowing it and accepting it were different things entirely. "Emma!" Sarah's voice was raw with fear. "Emma, get up here now!" 15 seconds. 20.
Then Emma's head appeared at the companionway, gasping and coughing. In her hand was the orange emergency beacon, its LED blinking reassuringly.
"Got it," she gasped. "But the whole cabin's flooded. We need to go now." They went over the side in order, Jamie first, then Sarah, then Emma with the beacon. David helped each of them into the life raft, watching his family's faces as they looked back at the Serenity. Marcus was last, and as he prepared to jump, he paused and looked at his father. "Dad, I'm sorry about what I said earlier. About the listening thing." David shook his head. "You were right. I haven't been listening to any of you." "Will you listen now?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," David said. "I'll listen." They jumped together as the Serenity's bow went under, taking with it everything they owned except each other and whatever they could carry in their hands. The life raft held, barely. Designed for 4 people, it crowded them together in a space smaller than their dining room table. The emergency supplies fit into 2 waterproof bags, a gallon of fresh water, some energy bars, basic first aid supplies, and the beacon that Emma had risked her life to retrieve. For the first hour, they were too exhausted and shocked to speak. They watched the Serenity disappear beneath the waves, taking with it not just their boat, but their old life, the one where problems could be avoided, where difficult conversations could be postponed, where the distance between family members was measured in rooms rather than survival. As darkness fell and the storm finally passed, they found themselves drifting under stars that seemed impossibly bright after the violence of the day. "How long do you think it'll take them to find us?" Jamie asked. David looked at the beacon, its steady blinking the only thing connecting them to the world they'd left behind. "I don't know, buddy. Could be hours, could be days." "Are we going to die?" The question came from Emma, delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone Jamie had used earlier. David thought about lying, about offering false comfort. Instead, he said, "I don't know that either. But I know we're going to take care of each other. And I know that whatever happens, we're going to face it together." Sarah reached across the cramped space and took his hand. "Together," she agreed. Marcus shifted closer to Jamie, putting an arm around his younger brother. "Together." Emma nodded and activated the beacon's strobe light, sending bright flashes across the dark water, a signal to anyone who might be looking that 4 people clung to life in the vast indifference of the sea. As the night deepened around them, the Roberts family began to talk. Really talk, maybe for the first time in years. About fear and failure, about love and disappointment, about all the things they'd avoided saying when they had the luxury of avoiding difficult truths. The ocean listened, vast and patient, as they discovered that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. And somewhere in the darkness, rescue crews were already searching, following the beacon's signal toward 4 people who had learned, in the space between one breath and the next, that survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about staying connected to the reasons you wanted to live at all. If you found this story touching, please remember to like and subscribe for more emotional stories of loss and discovery. This is based on events that happen more often than we realize, so share it with someone who needs to hear this.